Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the National Archives webinar, Archives for Everyone 2023 to 2027. My name is James Howard-Taylor, and I'm Projects and Events Officer here at the National Archives, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's talk. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping. The event will last approximately 1 hour, finishing at 12 p.m. UK time. A recording of this webinar will also be made available afterwards. As a reminder, there will be a live Q&A session after the presentation, so please do submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar, and we will aim to answer them. If you're joining the event on a laptop or a desktop computer, you can make use of live captioning. This can be enabled by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're joining us via a mobile device using the Zoom app, press the More button and then select Show Captions. I'll now pass on to Jeff James, Chief Executive and Keeper at the National Archives. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're well. We're going to do a bit of a relay event today, so I'm going to do the first leg and hand over to Emma Jane and Tina. We've got a few slides to talk you through, and then there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to start populating any questions that arise as we go through the presentation. But hopefully there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A. We'll whip through this fairly quickly. So what we're here today to talk about is Archives for Everyone. This is our as in the National Archives strategy, and we're going to obviously think about how that relates to the archives sector as we go through the slides. So perhaps we start with a bit of context. If we can have the next slide, please, James. So the first thing is that I just want to say that we're the board of the National Archives and our minister have recommitted to the Archives for Everyone mission, vision and principles. So hopefully you'll be aware that Archives for Everyone started in 2019. It basically came to an end at the end of March this year, and we've recommitted to that for another 4-year period from April. We've also, though, taken the opportunity to look a bit further. So we're taking a much longer horizon and trying to have a more developed sense of our direction. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides' time. The other thing to say is we recognize, and I guess it's really important to say this, that it's all very well having a plan, but it isn't going to account for all eventualities. And as you can imagine, when we set out in 2019 with Archives for Everyone, we didn't obviously plan for the pandemic, but equally we didn't plan for some of the big initiatives that we've done in the last 4 years, like our collaboration with Parliamentary Archives and the Fine Case Law Service that we launched last April. So what you're going to see really is our kind of outline plan, but bear in mind that we build in there some flexibility and we expect things to change as well. Thinking about what's coming up, obviously we all know there's going to be a general election by January 2025 at the latest. So we have that in our thinking about the 4-year plan and beyond. Our current spending review settlement finishes in March 25 as well. So we enter into this with the ambition and the plans, but we still have to secure the funding. And that's, again, one of the things we're thinking about. And this longer term horizon that I was talking about, we're going to go out to 2038 with that, and I'll explain the reasons for that in a moment. But what we're also having to do is think about the next 3+ planning cycles. So typically of government departments, we tend to do this in 4-year cycles. So that's just a little bit of context to set the scene, I suppose. So James, can we have the next slide? So really, I just wanted to remind you all of what our historic mission is. And I guess, I'll let you read that yourselves. The thing that's most relevant, perhaps, for today's conversation is the bit at the end where we talk about leading, partnering and supporting archives at home and across the globe. And we're recommitting to that mission. We're reaffirming that commitment. And at the same time, we're trying not to diminish our ambition, bearing in mind that there are still quite a lot of known unknowns. Next slide, please, James. Hopefully these are familiar to you. These are our 3 principles that we've had for the last 4 years, being inclusive, entrepreneurial and disruptive. And just to remind you, if you need it. Inclusive for us is thinking about our people. It's thinking about our audiences, and it's thinking about our collection. And it's also thinking about those three things across the sector as well as the leadership body for archives. So how can we move the dial, I suppose, is the expression that people quite often use in that phrase. And we can go into a bit more detail on that as we go through the webinar. We're already by far the most commercial archive anywhere on the world. And we want to continue to be entrepreneurial, but it's not just about our commercial activity. It's also about being creative, taking risks, being innovative. So the entrepreneurial aspects of what we talk about is very much that kind of that kind of spirit, I suppose. And it's very much anchored in the idea of partnerships and collaborations, because we realize we can't do all of this on our own. Quite often when we talk about disruptive archive, we're talking about digital. It's not the only area in which we think we need to disrupt practice, where we have to think about how what policies we're going to need and what practices we're going to need into the future. But a lot of what we're talking about in that area is anchored around that. So next slide, please, James. So I mentioned at the beginning we're taking a longer horizon. Many of you will probably know that 2038 marks the bicentenary of the founding of the Public Record Office. So it's actually quite a nice horizon framing timescale for us to work to. So that's a lot of what we're thinking when we're thinking about the vision, and we're going beyond the plans, is all about trying to get to 2038. And we've done the usual thing that you do with these things. We've thought about what kind of institution we think we need to be by 2038. So we need to be a living digital national archive, preserving the contemporary record of government, and radically widening access to the historic archive. A national archive, not just of government, but of the state. So last April, we launched Fine Case Law, which publishes court judgments, which are important public records. And as you probably know, we're also doing a collaboration with the parliamentary archives to see their collections come to queue by the summer of 2025. So we're making this transition from being the archive of government, the archive of the executive, to being the archive of all three arms of state. And that's, by 2038, we expect to be fully functioning and effective in that space. We want to be a genuinely inclusive, collaborative and available national archive, and an active catalyzing presence wherever we're encountered. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our ambitions to go beyond Q in a moment. And a demonstrably sustainable national archive, leading the archive sector, not just through example, but also through expertise and experience. So again, we'll cover some of that as we go through the webinar. So to help frame this, we've done a typical bit of alliteration. So James, next slide, please. So the first of those is collection. Again, what I'm talking about here really is the next 4 years. So going back to that idea of 4-year planning cycles that will collectively take us through to 2038. So over the next 4 years, we're going to begin a new era really in the history of our collection. We're going to be accessioning near contemporary digital records at scale. We're also going to be bringing the parliamentary archives together with the archive of government. And we're also going to be completing one of, if not the biggest transfers in our history, the 10 million or so MOD service personnel records. So if I just talk you through those briefly, exponential year-on-year growth of the digital archive. This is a really bold ambition, and exponential is quite a challenging statement for us to make, and we thought long and hard about this, but we think it's absolutely necessary. We want to underpin that exponential growth with a holistic service to both government and to the courts. We'll have completed the transfer of 15 linear kilometres of the Parliamentary Archives collection and successfully integrated staff and services supporting it. And as I said, the working assumption is that that's going to take place by summer 2025. And we'll have completed that transfer of 10 million MOD service records. And just to put this into context, you all know our collection stretches back 1,000 years. We have around about 250 linear kilometres. when I came back to Kew in 2014, we had 40 kilometres in deep store. We've doubled that now. We also have created a new repository at Kew with another 10 kilometres. So we're now up to about 250 kilometres, as I say. We think we're going to need to take in pretty much half of that again in the next 10 years. So around about 120 or so kilometres of additional storage requirements. And this is at the same time that we're seeing, and we expect to see, this exponential year-on-year growth of the digital archive. So from a collection perspective, it's extremely challenging for the organisation. We're very geared up at the opportunities that presents. The second C is custodianship. James, if you'd like to move on, thank you. So again, we're going to really be spending a lot of time thinking about how we think about and how we resource our work in and with the sector, and how we do that in a sustainable way over the next 4 years. So we're going to begin by exploring how we can expand our regional presence in a meaningful way, and we want to do that, as I say, through and with the archive sector, so that we can extend the reach of our collections and extend the visibility and the presence of the National Archives. We need to make sure that we've got a sustainable infrastructure in place to support the growth of that collection, particularly as we become the archive of the state. We have, like many organisations, some legacy infrastructure that we need to protect and sustain into the future. And we want to reduce some of the digital preservation risks for some of our records wherever they're held. And again, you've probably heard us say this before, 25% of the public record system is not held in Kew, it's held in archives, many of whom, many of you who are on this call will be responsible for. And then finally, we're going to engage the government and ask them if they'll commission us to do a refresh of Archives Unlocked, the government's vision for the archive sector. My team are already planning to engage ministers over the next couple of months so that we can hit the ground running with that in 2024. And then the last C from me is connection. So opening up bigger and better opportunities to connect with the collection for everyone everywhere. We're going to develop our ability to connect people with our collection in person, online, and also through education at all levels and through research and scholarships. And in each of these settings, we want to grow the number of people who encounter and benefit from their experience of archives. So increased in-person connections, promoting equity of access to our collections, not just at Kew, but across the country. Stronger online connections, making it easier for more people to encounter us and our content and offering a more accessible and satisfying experience. We obviously want to continue the work that we've been doing over the last decade or so in terms of our global connectivity, trying to expand access to our collections, which obviously are global in nature, not just those around shared archival heritage, but including those around shared archival heritage. And as I said at the beginning, enhance research connections, supporting more high impact research, especially where our collection has particular relevance. So Emma Jane and Tina will probably talk a little bit more about this, but basically a 50% increase in visitors, doubling of our participants in our learning programs, a new regional learning program, which we're planning to reach up to 10,000 students per year, and a new touring exhibition program. So that's the very high level kind of synopsis. I'm going to hand over now to Emma Jane and then to Tina to pass the baton on to them and carry on through to what this means for the sector. So over to you, Emma Jane.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Jeff. Yeah, so I'm doing leg 2 of the relay, and I'll sort of top and tail is what Tina's going to say. So I'll speak now and then again at the end. I'm Emma Jane Avery. I'm Director of Public Engagement and Sector Leadership. I'm really delighted to have taken on this role, and I've started sort of visiting other archives and getting out and sort of starting to experience the wealth of expertise and the work of archives around the country. So that's been really interesting and really exciting already. We've had some recent changes here at the National Archives. So with the formation of the new Directorate of Public Engagement and Sector Leadership, for the first time, sector leadership is specifically named at director level. So that's increasing the visibility of this really important area of TNA's work, something that was fed back to us during the leadership refresh. And archive sector development, as has become archive sector leadership. And Tina Morton, sitting next to me, has been confirmed as the permanent head of this department. So that's really good. And then in my and Tina's section of this talk, we're going to cover the three things that you can see on the screen now. So Tina's going to talk about the archive sector leadership refresh. So that's a recent review of TNA's responsibilities in leading the sector. We're going to talk a bit about what Archives for Everyone that Jeff's just described means for the sector. So Archives for Everyone's obviously TNA's strategic plan for the next 4 years and beyond. And we're also going to talk about the future of Archives Unlocked, which is the government's vision for the archive sector. So I'll hand over to Tina to get started on that.
So hopefully most of you will be aware of the leadership refresh. We've talked about it quite a lot over the last couple of years. So in 2021, after 10 years of being sector lead in England for the archive sector, we decided to have a review of our approach. We wanted to ensure that we're still doing the best we can to support and address sector needs and look at those opportunities and challenges. So we commissioned an independent report, looked at the recommendations, and as you know, did lots of consultation, both within the National Archives, amongst the sector, using the steering group for Archives Unlocked. So the resulting kind of evidence and diagnosis and actions very reflective of what the sector was telling us. We announced the kind of direction of travel at the DCDC conference during the summer, and you will hopefully again have seen lots of publicity around our leadership statement that we published. So the kind of reflections from that leadership piece of work was a focus on advocacy, partnership and leadership. So that is very much looking at how we advocate on behalf of and for the archive sector, how we kind of leverage partnerships and do more with partnerships that we currently have, and looking at how TNA as an organisation delivers the leadership functions. So thinking about how that ties in with Archives for Everyone and some of the things that Jeff's been talking about. As Emma Jane mentioned, there's a new directorate, and we've been looking at how archive sector leadership is an organisational wide function for TNA. We've been looking at a lot of our partnerships, particularly reworking the strategic alignment with Archives and Records Association, and we've recently published a new collaboration agreement with ARA, and we're really thinking about how we best align with them and complement each other's work. And as you'll see in the leadership statement, which areas are very much a professional body lead, and which things are things that we would lead on. So we've tried to make that much clearer. We've reviewed the funding streams that we have for the sector, and during the summer launched a refreshed funding offer. And again, I know we've done several webinars and lots of introductions to some of those new schemes. I think all of them have launched now, so we're kind of well on our way with that particular part. Part of that, looking at how we deliver leadership across the National Archive, is looking at sharing expertise. So looking at how TNA supports the sector as thought leaders, how we ensure that the pioneering research that we do is disseminated through to the sector, thinking about how we lead on things like environmental sustainability, around the inclusivity pieces that Jeff mentioned earlier, how we build trust, and look at barriers to access, participation and kind of understanding of archives. Also thinking about how we develop stronger relationships with other bodies and funders so that we can act more strategically for the sector. And looking at where others around the cultural sector are acting effectively, where we can form further agreements, commission work, or build on our current partnerships. So looking at whether we need new or need to enhance existing agreements that we have with people, and how we can kind of make sure that the work of the archives is feeding in and complementing other areas. Thanks. So what can you see in the next kind of year or so? We really are looking to respond to the call for stronger and more visible and more effective comms and advocacy. So we'll be looking at our strategies around that, both kind of for how we promote archives at kind of government and strategic levels, but also how we communicate what we're doing to the archive sector. Greater emphasis on data creation, how we can provide better evidence which will support things like funding and evaluation for the impact of archive sector, both on society, but also thinking about economics, and how we make more robust business cases for investment into archives. We will also try and engage other sectors, bodies and funders to raise the profile of archives. Next week, you'll see the launch of our Level 7 apprenticeship programme. That's been a programme that we've been working on for 2 or 3 years, so we're really pleased to see the culmination of that. Lots of interest. I think we have 50 organisations that are looking at joining that programme within the next few years. So we will really see some work in that area taking off. We launched our new digital capacity building strategy, our digital century, at the ARA conference last month. You will see a lot more activity around the 10-year review of archive service accreditation, which is in train as part of that wider partnership. So we're leading some of the work around that. One of the things that came out of the review was very much around working across the home nations more effectively. So we're looking to kind of re-engage at a kind of practical level, and thinking about how we align our strategic priorities across the organisations. Again, where our work complements each other and where we might want to think about which organisations are leading on different themes and different areas of work. And then finally, looking at supporting public engagement activity, as Jeff said, thinking about how that works regionally, looking at how much capacity there is for that in the archive sector, very alive to the kind of changing capacities at the moment across the sector, particularly with resource. So thinking about how we as the National Archives can support that. So I'm going to move back to Emma Jane now to think a bit about the strategy and the Archives Unlocked work.
Great. And just actually, while I've got a captive audience, just that last point about supporting public engagement activity, you might have noticed that there's a survey gone out across the sector to feedback what activity you do at the moment and what you'd like to do. So I'll just give a plug for that. If you haven't filled it in, we'd love to hear from you. So finally, Archives Unlocked. So this is the government's vision for the archives sector. In 2024, it was 8 years, unbelievably, since it was launched in 2016. As Jeff mentioned earlier, we're approaching our minister for a commission to lead a refresh of Archives Unlocked. And last time, the vision was co-curated with the sector through workshops, surveys, etc. So we would really like to repeat this and to gather your views during this process. As well, we'll be strengthening the Archives Unlocked steering group. It's got new terms of reference, and we'll be looking at the makeup of the group. And at the end of all of that, we'll be launching a new vision for the sector. So that is something that we'll be starting work on next year. Thank you, James. So finally, this is the last slide. We're really excited about our plans, not only for within the National Archives, but also with the sector more widely. And this refreshed offer that we've described is designed to lead towards a strong, sustainable, vibrant and relevant and inclusive sector led by data analysis that Tina's described, so that we can really start to demonstrate the value and impact of archives and their crucial element in their role within democracy and accountability.